Okay. Let's try this again. Hello, all. We're going to give this a round two and see what. We're going to see what happens now, because I do not understand why I got that notification. That was so strange. Anyway, um, hello, Tamra, Miss Deborah, Janice. Yeah, I'm hoping this works too, Miss Deborah. Okay, I'm going to start reading, and we'll see what's going on here. We'll see. All right. For anyone who has this, if you're following along, we're on chapter 18. So, all right, here we go. Giver, Jonas asked the next afternoon, do you ever think about release? Do you mean my own release or just the general topic of release? Both, I guess. I apologize. I should have been more precise, but I don't know exactly what I meant. Sit back up. No need to lie down while we're talking. Jonas, who had already been stretched out on the bed when the question came to his mind, sat back up. I guess I do think about it occasionally, the giver said. I think about my own release when I'm in an awful lot of pain. I wish I could put in a request for it sometimes, but I'm not permitted to do that until the new receiver is trained. Me, Jonas said in a dejected voice. He was not looking forward to the end of the training, when he would become the new receiver. It was clear to him what a terribly difficult and lonely life it was, despite the honor. I can't request release either, Jonas pointed out. It was in my rules. The giver laughed harshly. I know that. They hammered out those rules after the failure 10 years ago. Jonas had heard again and again now reference to the previous failure, but he still did not know what had happened 10 years before. Giver, he said, tell me what happened, please. The giver shrugged. On the surface, it was quite simple. A receiver-to-be was selected, the way you were. The selection went smoothly enough. The ceremony was held, and the selection was made. The crowd cheered, as they did for you. The new receiver was puzzled and a little frightened, as you were. My parents told me it was a female. The giver nodded. Jonas thought of his favorite female, Fiona, and shivered. He wouldn't want his gentle friend to suffer the way he had, taking on the memories. What was she like? He asked the giver. The giver looked sad, thinking about it. She was a remarkable young woman, very self-possessed and serene, intelligent, eager to learn. He shook his head and drew a deep breath. You know, Jonas, when she came to me in this room, when she presented herself to begin her training, Jonas interrupted him with a question. Can you tell me her name? My parents said that it wasn't to be spoken again in the community, but couldn't you say it just to me? The giver hesitated painfully, as if saying the name aloud might be excruciating. Her name was Rosemary, he told Jonas finally. Rosemary. I like that name. The giver went on. When she came to me for the first time, she sat there in the chair where you sat on your first day. She was eager and excited and a little scared. We talked. I tried to explain things as well as I could. The way you did to me. The giver chuckled ruefully. The explanations are difficult. The whole thing is so beyond one's experience. But I tried, and she listened carefully. Her eyes were very luminous, I remember. He looked up suddenly. Jonas, I gave you a memory that I told you was my favorite. I still have a shred of it left. The room, with the family and grandparents. Jonas nodded. Of course he remembered. Yes, he said. It had that wonderful feeling with it. You told me it was love. You can understand, then, that's what I felt for Rosemary, the giver explained. I loved her. I feel it for you, too, he added. What happened to her? Jonas asked. Her training began. She received well, as you do. She was so enthusiastic, so delighted to experience new things. I remember her laughter. His voice faltered and trailed off. What happened? Jonas asked again after a moment. Please tell me. The giver closed his eyes. It broke my heart, Jonas, to transfer pain to her, but it was my job. It was what I had to do, the way I've had to do it to you. The room was silent. Jonas waited. Finally, the giver continued. 5 weeks. That was all. I gave her happy memories, a ride on a merry-go-round, a kitten to play with, a picnic. Sometimes I chose one just because I knew it would make her laugh, and so I treasured the sound of that laughter in this room that had always been so silent. But she was like you, Jonas. She wanted to experience everything. She knew that it was her responsibility, and so she asked me for more difficult memories. Jonas held his breath for a moment. You didn't give her war, did you? Not after just 5 weeks. The giver shook his head and laughed. No, and I didn't give her physical pain, but I gave her loneliness, and I gave her loss. I transferred a memory of a child taken from its parents. That was the first one. She appeared stunned at its end. Jonas swallowed. Rosemary and her laughter had begun to seem real to him, and he pictured her looking up from the bed of memories, shocked. The giver continued. I backed off, gave her more little delights, but everything changed once she knew about pain. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't brave enough? Jonas suggested. The giver didn't respond to the question. She insisted that I continue, that I not spare her. She said it was her duty, and I knew, of course, that she was correct. I couldn't bring myself to inflict physical pain on her, but I gave her anguish of many kinds, poverty and hunger and terror. I had to, Jonas. It was my job, and she had been chosen. The giver looked at him imploringly. Jonas stroked his hand. Finally, one afternoon, we finished for the day. It had been a hard session. I tried to finish, as I do with you, by transferring something happy and cheerful, but the times of laughter were gone by then. She stood up very silently, frowning, as if she were making a decision. Then she came over to me and put her arms around me. She kissed my cheek. As Jonas watched, the giver stroked his own cheek, recalling the touch of Rosemary's lips 10 years before. She left here that day, left this room, and did not go back to her dwelling. I was notified by the speaker that she had gone directly to the chief elder and asked to be released. But it's against the rules. The receiver in training can't apply for It's in your rules, Jonas, but it wasn't in hers. She asked for release, and they had to give it to her. I never saw her again. So that was the failure, Jonas thought. It was obvious that it saddened the giver very deeply, but it didn't seem such a terrible thing after all. And he, Jonas, would never have done it, never have requested release, no matter how difficult his training became. The giver needed a successor, and he had been chosen. A thought occurred to Jonas. Rosemary had been released very early in her training. What if something happened to him, Jonas? He had a whole... What if something happened to him, Jonas? He had a whole year's worth of memories now. Giver, he asked, I can't request release, I know that. But what if something happened? An accident? What if I fell into the river like the little four, Caleb, did? Well, that doesn't make sense because I'm a good swimmer, but what if I couldn't swim and fell into the river and was lost? Then there wouldn't be a new receiver. But you would already have given away an awful lot of important memories. So even though they would select a new receiver, the memories would be gone except for the shreds that you left of them. And then what if... He started to laugh suddenly. I sound like my sister Lily, he said, amused at himself. The giver looked at him gravely. You must stay away from the river, my friend, he said. The community lost Rosemary after 5 weeks, and it was a disaster for them. I don't know what the community would do if they lost you. Why is it a disaster? I think I mentioned to you once, the giver reminded him, that when she was gone, the memories came back to the people. If you were to be lost in the river, Jonas, your memories would not be lost with you. Memories are forever. Rosemary had only 5 weeks' worth, and most of them were good ones. But there were those few terrible memories, the ones that had overwhelmed her. For a while they overwhelmed the community. All those feelings. They'd never experienced that before. I was so devastated by my own grief at her loss and my own feeling of failure that I didn't even help to try to help them get through it. I was angry too. The giver was quiet for a moment, obviously thinking. You know, he said finally, if they lost you, with all the training you've had now, they'd have all those memories again themselves. Jonas made a face. They'd hate that. They certainly would. They wouldn't know how to deal with it at all. The only way I deal with it is by having you there to help me, Jonas pointed out with a sigh. The giver nodded. I suppose, he said slowly, that I could... You could what? The giver was still deep in thought. After a moment, he said, If you floated off in the river, I suppose I could help the whole community the way I've helped you. It's an interesting concept. I need to think about it some more. Maybe we'll talk about it again sometime, but not now. I'm glad you're a good swimmer, Jonas, but stay away from the river. He laughed a little, but the laughter was not light-hearted. His thoughts seemed to be elsewhere, and his eyes were very troubled. Welcome, everyone who's just joined our live reading of The Giver. Did that get me a restriction? No. Okay, good. I think we're okay. I still have no idea what that restriction warning was. That was so strange. Chapter 19. Jonas glanced at the clock. There was so much work to be done, always, that he and the giver seldom simply sat and talked the way that they just had. I'm sorry that I wasted so much time with my questions, Jonas said. I was only asking about release because my father is releasing a new child today, a twin. He has to select one and release the other one. They do it by weight. Jonas glanced at the clock. Actually, I suppose he's already finished. I think it was this morning. The giver's face took on a solemn look. I wish they wouldn't do that, he said quietly, almost to himself. Well, they can't have 2 identical people around. Think how confusing it would be, Jonas chuckled. I wish I could watch, he added as an afterthought. He liked the thought of seeing his father perform the ceremony and making the little twin clean and comfy. His father was such a gentle man. You can watch, the giver said. No, Jonas told him, they never let children watch. It's very private. Jonas, the giver told him, I know that you read your training instructions very carefully. Don't you remember that you are allowed to ask anyone anything? Jonas nodded. Yes, but Jonas, when you and I have finished our time together, you will be the new receiver. You can read the books, you'll have the memories, you'll have access to everything. It's part of your training. If you want to watch a release, you simply have to ask. Jonas shrugged. Well, maybe I will then. But it's too late for this one. I'm sure it was this morning. The giver told him then something he had not known. All private ceremonies are recorded. They're in the Hall of Closed Records. Do you want to see this morning's release? Jonas hesitated. He was afraid that his father wouldn't like it if he watched something so private. I think you should, the giver told him firmly. All right then, Jonas said. Tell me how. The giver rose from his chair, went to the speaker on the wall, and clicked the switch from off to on. The voice spoke immediately. Yes, receiver, how may I help you? I would like to see this morning's release of the twin. One moment, receiver. Thank you for your instructions. Jonas watched the video screen above the row of switches. Its blank face began to flicker with zigzag lines. Then some numbers appeared, followed by the date and time. He was astonished and delighted that this was available to him, and surprised that he had not known. Suddenly, he could see a small, windowless room, empty except for a bed, a table with some equipment on it. Jonas recognized a scale. He had seen them before, when he'd been doing volunteer hours at the nurturing center. And a cupboard. He could see pale carpeting on the floor. It's just an ordinary room, he commented. I thought maybe they'd have it in the auditorium, so that everybody could come. All the old go to ceremonies of release, but I suppose that's when it's just a newborn, they don't... Shh, the giver said, his eyes on the screen. Jonas's father, wearing his nurturing uniform, entered the room, cradling a tiny new child wrapped in a soft blanket in his arms. A uniformed woman followed to the door, carrying a second new child wrapped in a similar blanket. That's my father, Jonas found himself whispering, as if he might wake the little ones if he spoke aloud. And the other nurturer is his assistant. She's still in training, but she'll be finished soon. The two nurturers unwrapped the blankets and laid the identical newborns on the bed. They were naked. Jonas could see that they were males. He watched, fascinated, as his father gently lifted one and then the other to the scale and weighed them. He heard his father laugh. Good, his father said to the woman. I thought for a moment that they might both be exactly the same. Then we'd have a problem. But this one, he handed one, after rewrapping it to the assistant, is 6 pounds even, so you can clean him up and dress him and take him over to the center. The woman took the new child and left through the door she had entered. Jonas watched as his father bent over the squirming new child on the bed. And you, little guy, you're only 5 pounds 10 ounces, a shrimp. That's the special voice he uses with Gabriel, Jonas remarked, smiling. Watch, the giver said. Now he cleans him up and makes him comfy, Jonas told him. He told me. Be quiet, Jonas, the giver commanded in a strange voice. Watch. Obediently, Jonas concentrated on the screen, waiting for what would happen next. He was especially curious about the ceremony part. His father turned and opened the cupboard. He took out a syringe and a small bottle. Very carefully, he inserted the needle into the bottle and began to fill the syringe with a clear liquid. Jonas winced sympathetically. He had forgotten that new children had to get shots. He hated shots himself, though he knew that they were necessary. To his surprise, his father began very carefully to direct the needle into the top of the new child's forehead, puncturing the place where the fragile skin pulsed. The newborn squirmed and wailed faintly. Why is he... Shh! The giver said sharply. His father was talking, and Jonas realized that he was hearing the answer to the question he had started to ask. Still in the special voice, his father was saying, I know, it hurts, little guy, but I have to use a vein, and the vein in your arms are still too teeny-weeny. He pushed the plunger very slowly, injecting the liquid into the scalp vein until the syringe was empty. All done. That wasn't so bad, was it? Jonas heard his father say cheerfully. He turned aside and dropped the syringe into a waste receptacle. Now he cleans him up and makes him comfy, Jonas said to himself, aware that the giver didn't want to talk during the little ceremony. As he continued to watch, the new child, no longer crying, moved his arms and legs in a jerking motion. Then he went limp. His head fell to the side, his eyes half open. Then he was still. With an odd, shocked feeling, Jonas recognized the gestures and posture and expression. They were familiar. He had seen them before, but he couldn't remember where. Jonas stared at the screen, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The little twin lay motionless. His father was putting things away, folding the blanket, closing the cupboard. Once again, as he had on the playing field, he felt the choking sensation. Once again he saw the face of the light-haired, bloodied soldier as life left his eyes. The memory came back. He killed it. My father killed it, Jonas said to himself, stunned at what he was realizing. He continued to stare at the screen numbly. His father tidied the room, then he picked up a small carton that lay waiting on the floor, set it on the bed, and lifted the limp body into it. He placed the lid on tightly. He picked up the carton and carried it to the other side of the room. He opened a small door in the wall. Jonas could see darkness behind the door. It seemed to be the same sort of chute into which trash was deposited at school. His father loaded the carton containing the body into the chute and gave it a shove. "Bye-bye, little guy," Jonas heard his father say before he left the room. Then the screen went blank. The giver turned to him. Quite calmly, he related, "When the speaker notified me that Rosemary had applied for release, they turned on the tape to show me the process. There she was, my last glimpse of that beautiful child, waiting. They brought in the syringe and asked her to roll up her sleeve." "You suggested, Jonas, that perhaps she wasn't brave enough? I don't know about bravery, what it is, what it means. I do know that I sat here numb with horror, wretched and helpless, and I listened as Rosemary told them that she would prefer to inject herself. Then she did so. I didn't watch. I looked away." The giver turned to him. "Well, there you are, Jonas. You were wondering about release," he said in a bitter voice. Jonas felt a ripping sensation inside of himself, the feeling of terrible pain clawing its way forward to emerge in a cry. I know that one was tough. You guys doing okay? Chapter 20. I won't go home. You can't make me," Jonas sobbed and shouted and pounded the bed with his fists. "Sit up, Jonas," the giver told him firmly. Jonas obeyed him. Weeping, shuddering, he sat on the edge of the bed. He would not look at the giver. "You may stay here tonight. I want to talk to you, but you must be quiet now while I notify your family unit. No one must hear you cry." Jonas looked up wildly. "No one heard that little twin cry either. No one but my father." He collapsed in sobs again. The giver waited silently. Finally, Jonas was able to quiet himself, and he sat huddled, his shoulders shaking. The giver waited silently. The giver went to the wall speaker and clicked the switch to on. "Yes, receiver, how may I help you?" "Notify the new receiver's family unit that he will be staying with me this evening for additional training." "I will take care of that, sir. Thank you for your instructions," the voice said. "I will take care of that, sir. I will take care of that, sir," Jonas mimicked in a cruel, sarcastic voice. "I will do whatever you like, sir. I will kill people, sir. Old people, small newborn people. I'd be happy to kill them, sir. Thank you for your instructions, sir. How may I help you?" He couldn't seem to stop himself. The giver grasped his shoulders firmly. Jonas fell silent and stared at him. "Listen to me, Jonas. They can't help it. They know nothing. You said that to me once before. I said it because it's true. It's the way they live. It's the life that was created for them. It's the same life that you would have if you had not been chosen as my successor." "But he lied to me," Jonas wept. "It's what he was told to do, and he knows nothing else." "What about you? Do you lie to me too?" Jonas almost spat the question at the giver. I am empowered to lie, but I have never lied to you." Jonas stared at him. "Release is always like that? For people who break the rules 3 times? For the old? Do they kill the old too?" "Yes, it's true." "And what about Fiona? She loves the old. She's in training to care for them. Does she know yet? What will she do when she finds out? How will she feel?" Jonas brushed wetness from his face with the back of his hand. "Fiona is already being trained in the fine art of release," the giver told him. "She's very efficient at her work, your red-haired friend. Feelings are not part of the life she's learned." Jonas wrapped his arms around himself and rocked his own body back and forth. "What should I do? I can't go back. I can't." The giver stood up. "First, I will order our evening meal. Then we will eat." Jonas found himself using the nasty, sarcastic voice again. "Then we'll have a sharing of feelings?" The giver gave a rueful, anguished, empty laugh. "Jonas, you and I are the only ones who have feelings. We've been sharing them for almost a year now." "I'm sorry, giver," Jonas said miserably. "I don't mean to be so hateful. Not to you." The giver rubbed Jonas's hunched shoulders. "After we eat," he went on, "we'll make a plan." Jonas looked up, puzzled. "A plan for what?" There's nothing we can do. It's always been this way. Before me, before you, before the ones who came before you. Back and back and back." His voice trailed the familiar phrase. "Jonas," the giver said after a moment, "it's true that it has been this way for what seems forever. But the memories tell us that it has not always been. People felt things once. You and I have been part of that. So we know. We know that they once felt things like pride and sorrow and love," Jonas added, remembering the family scene that had so affected him. "And pain." He thought again of the soldier. "The worst part of holding the memories is not the pain. It's the loneliness of it. Memories need to be shared." "I've started to share them with you," Jonas said, trying to cheer him. "That's true. And having you here with me over the past year has made me realize that things must change. For years I felt that they should, but it seemed so hopeless. Now, for the first time, I think there might be a way," the giver said slowly. "And you brought it to my attention barely—" he glanced at the clock, "2 hours ago." Jonas watched him and listened. It was late at night now. They had talked and talked. Jonas sat wrapped in a robe belonging to the giver, the long robe that only elders wore. It was possible, what they had planned. Barely possible. If it failed, he would very likely be killed. But what did it matter? If he stayed, his life was no longer worth living. "Yes," he told the giver, "I'll do it. I think I can do it. I'll try anyway. But I want you to come with me." The giver shook his head. "Jonas," he said, "the community has depended all these generations, back and back and back, on a resident receiver to hold their memories for them. I've turned over many of them to you in the past year, and I can't take them back. There's no way for me to get them back if I have given them. So if you escape, once you are gone, and Jonas, you know that you can never return." Jonas nodded solemnly. It was the terrifying part. "Yes," he said, "I know. But if you come with me—" The giver shook his head and made a gesture to silence him. He continued, "If you get away, if you get beyond, if you get to elsewhere, it will mean that the community has to bear the burden themselves of the memories you had been holding for them. I think that they can, and that they will acquire some wisdom, but it will be desperately hard for them. When we lost Rosemary 10 years ago and her memories returned to the people, they panicked. And those were such few memories compared to yours. When your memories return, they'll need help. Remember how I helped you in the beginning, when the receiving of memories was new to you?" Jonas nodded. It was scary at first, and it hurt a lot. You needed me then, and now they will. It's no use. They'll find someone to take my place. They'll choose a new receiver. There's no one ready for training. Not right away. Oh, they'll speed up the selection, of course, but I can't think of another child who has the right qualities. There's a little female with pale eyes, but she's only a 6. That's correct. I know the one you mean. Her name is Catherine, but she's too young, so they will be forced to bear those memories. I want you to come with me, Giver, Jonas pleaded. No, I have to stay here, the Giver said firmly. I want to, Jonas. If I go with you, and together we take away all their protection from the memories, Jonas, the community will be left with no one to help them. They'll be thrown into chaos. They'll destroy themselves. I can't go. Giver, Jonas suggested, you and I don't need to care about the rest of them. The Giver looked at him with a questioning smile. Jonas hung his head. Of course they needed to care. It was the meaning of everything. And in any case, Jonas, the Giver sighed, I wouldn't make it. I'm very weakened now. Do you know that I no longer see colors? Jonas's heart broke. He reached for the Giver's hand. You have the colors, the Giver told him, and you have the courage. I will help you to have the strength. A year ago, Jonas reminded him, when I had just become a 12, when I began to see the first color, you told me that the beginning had been different for you, but that I wouldn't understand. The Giver brightened. That's true. And do you know, Jonas, that with all your knowledge now, with all your memories, with all you've learned, still you won't understand? Because I've been a little selfish. I haven't given any of it to you. I wanted to keep it for myself to the last. Keep what? When I was just a boy, younger than you, it began to come to me, but it wasn't the seeing beyond for me. It was different. For me, it was hearing beyond. Jonas frowned, trying to figure that out. What do you mean? What do you hear? He asked. Music, the Giver said, smiling. I began to hear something truly remarkable, and it is called music. I will give you some before I go. Jonas shook his head emphatically. No, Giver, I want you to keep that, to have with you when I'm gone. Jonas went home the next morning, cheerfully greeted his parents, and lied easily about what a busy, pleasant night he'd had. His father smiled and lied easily too, about his busy and pleasant day the day before. Throughout the school day, as he did his lessons, Jonas went over the plan in his head. It seemed startlingly simple. Jonas and the Giver had gone over it and over it, late into the night hours. For the next 2 weeks, as the time for December ceremony approached, the Giver would transfer every memory of courage and strength that he could to Jonas. He would need those to help him find the elsewhere that they were both sure existed. They knew it would be a very difficult journey. Then, in the middle of the night before the ceremony, Jonas would secretly leave his dwelling. This was probably the most dangerous part, because it was a violation of a major rule for any citizen not on official business to leave a dwelling at night. I'll leave at midnight, Jonas said. The food collectors will be finished picking up the evening meal remains by then, and the path maintenance crews don't start their work that early, so there won't be anyone to see me, unless, of course, someone is out on emergency business. I don't know what you should do if you are seen, Jonas, the Giver had said. I have memories, of course, of all kinds of escapes, people fleeing from terrible things throughout history, but every situation is individual. There is no memory of one like this. I'll be careful, Jonas said. No one will see me. As receiver in training, you're held in very high respect already, so I think you wouldn't be questioned very forcefully. I'd just say I was on some important errand for the receiver. I'd say it was all your fault that I was out after hours, Jonas teased. They both laughed a little nervously, but Jonas was certain that he could slip away unseen from his house, carrying an extra set of clothing. Silently, he would take his bicycle to the riverbank and leave it there hidden in bushes with the clothing folded beside it. Then he would make his way through the darkness, on foot, silently, to the annex. "There's no nighttime attendant," the giver explained. "I'll leave the door unlocked. You simply slip into the room. I'll be waiting for you." His parents would discover when they woke that he was gone. They would also find a cheerful note from Jonas on his bed, telling them that he was going for an early morning ride along the river, that he would be back for the ceremony. His parents would be irritated, but not alarmed. They would think him inconsiderate, and they would plan to chastise him later. They would wait, with mounting anger, for him. Finally, they would be forced to go, taking Lily to the ceremony without him. "They won't say anything to anyone, though," Jonas said, quite certain. "They won't call attention to my rudeness because it would reflect on their parenting. And anyway, everyone is so involved in the ceremony that they probably won't notice that I'm not there. Now that I'm a 12 and in training, I don't have to sit with my age group anymore. So Asher will think I'm with my parents, or with you, and your parents will assume you're with Asher, or with me." Jonas shrugged. "It will take everyone a while to realize that I'm not there at all. And you and I will be long on our way by then." In the early morning, the giver would order a vehicle and driver from the speaker. He visited the other communities frequently, meeting with their elders. His responsibilities extended over all the surrounding areas, so this would not be an unusual undertaking. Ordinarily, the giver did not attend the December ceremony. Last year, he had been present because of the occasion of Jonas's selection, in which he was so involved. But his life was usually quite separate from that of the community. No one would comment on his absence, or the fact that he had chosen this day to be away. When the driver and vehicle arrived, the giver would send the driver on some brief errand. During his absence, the giver would help Jonas hide in the storage area of the vehicle. He would have with him a bundle of food, which the giver would have saved from his own meals during the next 2 weeks. The ceremony would begin, with all the community there, and by then Jonas and the giver would be on their way. By midday, Jonas's absence would become apparent and would be a cause for serious concern. The ceremony would not be disrupted. Such a disruption would be unthinkable, but searchers would be sent out into the community. By the time his bicycle and clothing were found, the giver would be returning. Jonas by then would be on his own, making his journey elsewhere. The giver, on his return, would find the community in a state of confusion and panic, confronted by a situation which they had never faced before, and having no memories from which to find either solace or wisdom, they would not know what to do and would seek his advice. He would go to the auditorium where the people would be gathered still. He would stride to the stage and command their attention. He would make the solemn announcement that Jonas had been lost in the river. He would immediately begin the ceremony of loss. "Jonas, Jonas," they would say loudly, as they had once said the name of Caleb. The giver would lead the chant. Together they would let Jonas's presence in their lives fade away, as they had said his name in unison more slowly, softer and softer, until he was disappearing from them, until he was no more than an occasional murmur, and then, by the end of the long day, gone forever, not to be mentioned again. Their attention would turn to the overwhelming task of bearing the memories themselves. The giver would help them. "Yes, I understand that they'll need you," Jonas had said at the end of their lengthy discussion and planning. "But I'll need you too. Please come with me." He knew the answer even as he made the final plea. "My work will be finished," the giver had replied gently, "when I have helped the community to change and become whole. I am grateful to you, Jonas, because without you I would never have figured out a way to bring about the change. But your role now is to escape, and my role is to stay." "But don't you want to be with me, giver?" Jonas asked sadly. The giver hugged him. "I love you, Jonas," he said, "but I have another place to go. When my work here is finished, I want to be with my daughter." Jonas had been staring glumly at the floor. Now he looked up, startled. I didn't know you had a daughter, Giver. You told me that you'd had a spouse, but I never knew about your daughter. The Giver smiled and nodded. For the first time in their long months together, Jonas saw him look truly happy. Her name was Rosemary, the Giver said. Mm. "21. It would work. They could make it work, Jonas told himself again and again throughout the day. But that evening, everything changed. All of it. All the things that they had thought through so meticulously fell apart. That night, Jonas was forced to flee. He left the dwelling shortly after the sky became dark and the community still. It was terribly dangerous because some of the work crews were still about, but he moved stealthily and silently, staying in the shadows, making his way past the darkened dwellings and the empty central plaza toward the river. Beyond the plaza, he could see the house of the old, with the annex behind it, outlined against the night sky. But he could not stop there. There was no time. Every minute counted now, and every minute must take him farther from the community. Now he was on the bridge, hunched over on the bicycle, pedaling steadily. He could see the dark, churning water far below. He felt, surprisingly, no fear, nor any regret at leaving the community behind, but he felt a very deep sadness that he had left his closest friend behind. He knew that in the danger of his escape he must be absolutely silent, but with his heart and mind he called back and hoped that his capacity for hearing beyond, the Giver would know that Jonas had said goodbye. It had happened at the evening meal. The family unit was eating together as always, Lily chattering away, mother and father making their customary comments, and lies, Jonas knew, about the day. Nearby, Gabriel played happily on the floor, babbling his baby talk, looking with glee now and then toward Jonas, obviously delighted to have him back after the unexpected night away from the dwelling. Father glanced down toward the toddler. "Enjoy it, little guy," he said. "This is your last night as visitor." "What do you mean?" Jonas asked him. Father sighed with disappointment. "Well, you know he wasn't here when you got home this morning because we had him stay overnight at the nurturing center. It seemed like a good opportunity, with you gone, to give it a try. He'd been sleeping so soundly." "Didn't it go well?" Mother asked sympathetically. Father gave a rueful laugh. "That's an understatement. It was a disaster. He cried all night, apparently. The night crew couldn't handle it. They were really frazzled by the time I got to work." "Gabe, you naughty thing," Lily said, with a scolding little cluck toward the grinning toddler on the floor. "So," Father went on, "we obviously had to make the decision. Even I voted for Gabriel's release when we had the meeting this afternoon." Jonas put down his fork and stared at his father. "Release?" he asked. Father nodded. "We certainly gave it our best try, didn't we?" "Yes, we did," Mother agreed emphatically. Lily nodded in agreement too. Jonas worked at keeping his voice absolutely calm. "When?" he asked. "When will he be released?" "First thing tomorrow morning. We have to start our preparations for the naming ceremony, so we thought we'd get this taken care of right away." "It's bye-bye to you, Gabe, in the morning," Father had said in his sweet, sing-song voice. Jonas reached the opposite side of the river, stopped briefly, and looked back. The community where his entire life had been lived lay beyond him now, sleeping. At dawn, the orderly, disciplined life he had always known would continue again without him, the life where nothing was ever unexpected, or inconvenient, or unusual, the life without color, pain, or past. He pushed firmly again at the pedal with his foot and continued riding along the road. It was not safe to spend time looking back. He thought of the rules he had broken so far, enough that if he were caught now, he would be condemned. First, he had left the dwelling at night, a major transgression. Second, he had robbed the community of food, a very serious crime, even though what he had taken was leftovers, set out on the dwelling doorsteps for collection. Third, he had stolen his father's bicycle. He had hesitated for a moment, standing beside the bike port in the darkness, not wanting anything of his father's, and uncertain as well whether he could comfortably ride the larger bike when he was so accustomed to his own. But it was necessary, because it had the child seat attached to the back. And he had taken Gabriel, too. He could feel the little head nudge his back, bouncing gently against him as he rode. Gabriel was sleeping soundly, strapped into the seat. Before he had left the dwelling, he had laid his hands firmly on Gabe's back and transmitted to him the most soothing memory he could. A slow swinging hammock under palm trees on an island someplace, at evening, with a rhythmic sound of languid water lapping hypnotically against a nearby beach. As the memory seeped from him into the new child, he could feel Gabe's sleep ease and deepen. There had been no stir at all when Jonas lifted him from the crib and placed him gently into the molded seat. He knew that he had the remaining hours of night before they would be aware of his escape, so he rode hard, steadily, willing himself not to tire as the minutes and miles passed. There had been no time to perceive the memories he and the giver had counted on, of strength and courage, so he relied on what he had and hoped it would be enough. He circled the outlying communities, their dwellings dark. Gradually the distances between communities widened, with longer stretches of empty road. His legs ached at first, then, as time passed, they became numb. At dawn, Gabriel began to stir. They were in an isolated place. Fields on either side of the road were dotted with thickets of trees here and there. He saw a stream and made his way to it across a rutted, bumpy meadow. Gabriel, wide awake now, giggled as the bicycle jolted him up and down. Jonas unstrapped Gabe, lifted him from his bike, and watched him investigate the grass and twigs with delight. Carefully, he hid the bicycle in thick bushes. "Morning meal, Gabe!" He unwrapped some of the food and fed them both. Then he filled the cup he had brought with water from the stream and held it for Gabriel to drink. He drank thirstily himself and sat by the stream, watching the new child play. He was exhausted. He knew he must sleep, resting his own muscles and preparing himself for more hours on the bicycle. It would not be safe to travel in daylight. They would be looking for him soon. He found a place deeply hidden in the trees, took the new child there and lay down, holding Gabriel in his arms. Gabe struggled cheerfully as if it were a wrestling game, the kind they had played back in the dwelling, with tickles and laughter. "Sorry, Gabe," Jonas told him. "I know it's morning, and I know you just woke up, but we have to sleep now." He cuddled the small body close to him and rubbed the little back. He murmured to Gabriel soothingly. Then he pressed his hands firmly and transmitted a memory of deep, contented exhaustion. Gabriel's head nodded after a moment and fell against Jonas's chest. Together the fugitives slept through the first dangerous day. The most terrifying thing was the plains. By now, days had passed. Jonas no longer knew how many. The journey had become automatic. The sleep by days, hidden in the underbrush and trees, the finding of water, the careful division of scraps of food, augmented by what he could find in the fields, and the endless miles on the bicycle by night. His leg muscles were taut now. They ached when he settled himself to sleep, but they were stronger, and he stopped now less often to rest. Sometimes he paused and lifted Gabriel down for a brief bit of exercise, running down the road or through a field together in the dark, but always when he returned, strapped the uncomplaining toddler into the seat again and remounted, his legs were ready. So he had enough strength of his own, and had not needed what the giver might have provided, had there been time. But when the planes came, he wished that he could have received the courage. He knew they were search planes. They flew so low that they woke him with the noise of their engines, and sometimes, looking out and up fearfully from the hiding places, he could almost see the faces of the searchers. He knew that they could not see color, and that their flesh, as well as Gabriel's light golden curls, would be no more than smears of gray against the colorless foliage. But he remembered from his science and technology studies at school that the search planes used heat-seeking devices which could identify body warmth and would hone in on two humans huddled in shrubbery. So always, when he heard the aircraft sound, he reached to Gabriel and transmitted memories of snow, keeping some for himself. Together they became cold, and when the planes were gone, they would shiver, holding each other, until sleep came again. Sometimes, urging the memories into Gabriel, Jonas felt that they were more shallow, a little weaker than they had been. It was what he had hoped, and what he and the giver had planned, that as he moved away from the community, he would shed the memories and leave them behind for the people. But now, when he needed them, when the planes came, he tried hard to cling to what he still had of cold and to use it for their survival. Usually the aircraft came by day when they were hiding, but he was alert at night too, on the road, always listening intently for the sound of the engines. Even Gabriel listened and would call out, "Plane! Plane!" sometimes before Jonas had heard the terrifying noise. When the aircraft searchers came, as they did occasionally, during the night as they rode, Jonas sped to the nearest tree or bush, dropped to the ground and made himself and Gabriel cold. But it was sometimes a frighteningly close call. As he pedaled through the nights, through isolated landscape now, with the communities far behind, and no sign of human habitation around him or ahead, he was constantly vigilant, looking for the nearest hiding place, should the sound of engines come. But the frequency of the planes diminished. They came less often and flew when they did, less slowly, as if the search had become haphazard and no longer hopeful. Finally, there was an entire day and night when they did not come at all. All right. Thank you all so much for joining me this evening for our reading. I know one of those chapters was tough. I know that was tough. So, but I'm glad you guys stuck with me. I'm glad you guys stuck it through with me. So, I'm almost wondering if I should like read ahead and kind of do trigger warnings for people. I'm not sure, because I also don't want to give the storyline away. But if you guys would like me to start doing that, maybe leave me a direct message me. Let me know if you're someone who watches me on a regular basis with these book readings. I don't know why I haven't even thought about this up till now. If you'd be interested in me giving trigger warnings for the beginnings of these readings, let me know. Or if not, if you want to just discover the series and the stories organically, that's fine too. I know the series and I've read them. Oh, you've read them all recently. Oh, so here you are listening to it again. I hope I'm doing it justice. So I will see you guys on Monday, same time, 8 to 9 next Monday. So until next week, stay hydrated, stay safe, and for those of you who celebrate Happy Easter, because that's coming up on Sunday. So if you guys participate in Easter celebrations, Happy Easter. And I will see you all on Monday. Bye.